I'm Tom Folders with the Alumni Association, and welcome to the last day of Reunions 2011. We hope you all had a great time, and on behalf of the university as well as the Alumni Association, we really enjoyed having you here. It's my pleasure to introduce Larry Sabato. The reason Larry is so well known among our alumni is not because he's a political prognosticator extraordinaire. He is. It's not because he's written so many books. He has. It's not because he seems to appear on every TV show. He does. The reason we're really popular among alumni is because A, he's a great professor, and his classes are always full, very hard to get into. B, he's an unabashed supporter of all things UVA. C, he votes for Mr. Jefferson in every presidential election. And finally, he's one of us. He's a proud alumnus of the class of 1974. So with that, Larry, you're on.
Thank you, Tom. Whatever it was you said, I was busy talking to other people, trying to get in shape for this group. I hope you all have gotten one of our UVA Center for Politics pins. Did you get those? Were they passed out? These are so neat. Now, don't miss the major feature, which is this little pullout, which has everything we do, all 365 days out of the year, and also, oh, by the way, how you can make a contribution to the Center for Politics. So, by the way, where are my staff members? Here's one right here. Joe, thank you very much. All right, well, look, you're here to talk about politics. I'm here to talk about politics. Governor Gilmore, how are you? Roxanne, nice to see you. You correct me on anything that I'm wrong on, okay? But don't do it too conspicuously. We're going to take a little trip down, not memory lane, but future lane here, and see what we can see about politics for this year and next year and maybe even the year after. And thanks to my assistant, Joe Figueroa, who's leaving me, as all my assistants do, to go to law school. I don't know why I send him in that direction. His goal is to defend John Edwards. We're gonna take a look at 2012, and you know, it's not easy to see this early. And I'm not sure that we'll be able to discern any particular winners, but we're gonna try and do what we can to at least outline what's going to be happening. And we all know, aren't these little devices great? By the way, I know nothing about this. I'm 2 generations behind on technology. It's because I have a young staff, and they just give me this and say, press this button and don't screw it up. And that's what I do. But the 3 things in 2011, and we're all following them, the debt and the deficit, and if ever there's a year to finally deal with it, it's this year. I don't know whether we will, but if we don't this year, it's just going to get worse and worse, and that the debt ceiling limit vote is the moment to do it. And I think they will reach an agreement. They have to reach an agreement. You know, they have to raise the debt limit. You may not like it. They have to do it. And the question is, what goes along with it? Is it going to be a real program or a phony program to reduce the debt? And we'll just have to see. I think it has to be at least partly real because this has to be bipartisan. The Republican House is going to insist that it be real because their constituency now, at least a third of it, maybe more, is a Tea Party. So they can't go back home and run for renomination. They have to get renominated before they get reelected. They can't get renominated unless they show they've made progress on the debt and the deficit. But obviously we're going to, I think stupidly, the administration moved the deadline from July to now it's August 2nd, which in Washington terms means you wait till the last minute. There's some talk about them finishing early. I'll believe that when I see it. It's always possible, but it would be a first for Washington. It would be wonderful if they did. The markets would be less rattled. Redistricting goes on in all 50 states, even the 7 states that have just 1 member of the House of Representatives. You have to redistrict all of the state legislative seats. It's vicious. There's always blood on the floor. They care about that more than they do anything else because it's their seats. It's their futures, their individual futures. You can't really hold that against them, but that's why the fights are often so difficult on redistricting. And you know, the only group cut out generally is the public. You have a few states that are run by nonpartisan commissions. Redistricting is done in some fairly nonpartisan way, though there's no purely nonpartisan way to do it. But most states are like Virginia. Those of you who are from Virginia, it's done of, by, and for the politicians. They serve themselves first. They make absolutely certain they're taken care of. They always remind me of one of my favorite Pauls of all time. I don't think you met him, Governor. Vito Marzullo, who was a long time, I think it was like 36 years, city council person up in Chicago. Daily guy, old daily guy. Finally retired in his 80s. Finally left the city council. And he was asked by a reporter, why did you leave? Why did you get into politics? Why did you get in all those years ago? And he says, why did I get in? I got in to reward my friends and screw my enemies. And that pretty much summarizes redistricting. They reward their friends, they screw their enemies, and whether you're served is completely immaterial. You have nothing to do with it. Believe me, absolutely nothing. And both sides are equally guilty. For you partisans out there, I love you, but I hate you, because you always see only one side of the equation, and your side is perfect, and the other side is evil, and it's a joke. And I think the longer you live, the more you see that. And then political posturing, I thank God for political posturing. That creates my job. And I just think it's great. You may not like it. I want more and more and more of it. Okay. Now, redistricting, obviously, you've all seen this map because it's been in effect since January, a result of the census. And it's just the same old thing we've seen since 1950. Every 10 years, you have more seats moving from the Northeast, the Frost Belt, into the South and the West, the Sun Belt. And that's where the population flow goes. That's where the seats go. We do have one person, one vote, so at least the allocation of seats is based on population. And naturally, Florida didn't do as well this time as it's done many times. California got nothing at all because people are voting with their feet in California with all of its problems. And I don't just mean Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's out of office. He's no longer their problem. I'm going to try, by the way, to get through the speech without talking about Schwarzenegger. I'm not going to mention John Edwards again, and goodness knows I'm not telling any Anthony Weiner jokes. Okay? That's off limits. Don't even ask me about it. We all know what happened. Texas gaining 4, but you know, it's deceptive because there are two levels of redistricting. The first level is for the Electoral College, because this is how you move electoral votes too. And Texas, it will shock you to learn, will vote Republican in 2012. Even it's going to be targeted by Obama. They're actually trying to turn Texas, and they're going to be very disappointed. It's not going to happen. By mid-century, it may happen because of the growth of the Hispanic vote. So those are 4 extra electoral votes for the Republican nominee in 2012, assuming they don't go completely off the rails and nominate a nutcase. And we'll talk about that later on. They've got several to choose from. But in Congress, this is actually going to be a 2-2 split. The 2 of those seats are going to be so Hispanic, I think they'll elect Democrats. Not absolutely certain, but pretty certain. And 2 Republican seats. So you have to look at redistricting on a split-level screen. It affects Congress. What's going on right now with redistricting affects the balance of power in Congress. But generally speaking, you're going to have some states controlled by Democratic governors and Democratic legislatures that are going to redistrict Republican legislators out. And then you're going to have Republican states with Republican governors and legislatures redistricting Democrats out. And I'm not going to say it balances out perfectly, but it does tend to balance. Example, Illinois. Who's from Illinois here? You've got a very heavily Democratic legislature, you've got a Democratic governor, and incredibly, they have taken your delegation, which is now substantially Republican, and simply by drawing the lines carefully, they've guaranteed that at least 5 incumbent Republican congressmen are going to lose. Some of them have to run against one another. So it's going to be +5 Democratic seats in the House of Representatives just in Illinois. Sounds like a disaster for the Republicans. till you go to North Carolina. Now, they haven't done their lines yet. Who's from North Carolina? We got quite a few. I think it's wonderful that you recognize the inadequacy of your higher educational system and came to Virginia. I salute you for that. I salute you for that. I mean, they may be able to play basketball. Who cares, really, when you get right down to it? But just kidding. They have some fine educational institutions, but that's for the record. When they get to it, the legislature is now Republican. The Democratic governor has no role in North Carolina. It's the only state where a governor doesn't have the veto power. My guess is at least 3 Democratic congressmen in North Carolina will bite the dust through redistricting. Democratic congressmen may bite the dust in Utah. They've got one, and they're going to draw the lines in such a way to make it tough for him to win. And you go through the states, and you can see on one side of the aisle you're going to have this many seats. On the other side of the aisle, this many seats gained. And there's going to be some net positive for one side or the other, but it's not going to be enormous. So the current balance, Republicans have a 47-seat majority, which means Democrats need to pick up 24 to take control of the House. It's 241 Republican, 194 Democrat. There's only one way they can do it, and that is if President Obama ends up winning a landslide for re-election. He would need a very weak Republican opponent. And if the Republicans nominate one of the many weak candidates in this current field, it could happen. That's the only way it could happen. Otherwise, I think Republicans will hold the House. And here's to show you how difficult it is. I know it's early on a Sunday morning. By the way, I salute those of you who've shown up despite your Wahoo hangovers. I mean, this is early on a Sunday morning. Really, this is impressive that you would come. But if you look at these 4 presidents who were reelected, the 4 presidents who got a second term in modern times, 3 of them had either a landslide or a near landslide. Only Bush did not. He was the only one who had a very close race for re-election. But you see, Nixon got 61%, and he only carried in 13 additional Republican House members. Reagan, 58%. He only got 15 additional Republican House members. Clinton, 9-point lead over Bob Dole. He only got 9. And Bush only got +3. Because of our polarized system as much as anything else. But the point here is that when presidents win second terms, often it's a lonely landslide or a lonely victory, and they don't get a whole lot of coattails in the second win. Whatever coattails they have come in the first win. So again, it is possible for Democrats to regain control of the House if the presidential contest falls just right. It is difficult for them to gain control of the House again. I threw this in for Virginians. Where are my Virginians? There are a lot of you here. It's so convenient and easy. And you know your map of Virginia. This is kind of the redistricting angle on it. And my guess is that the vast majority of you in this room are from Northern Virginia or Richmond or Tidewater. And the reason I'm pretty sure of that is because when you take all these cities and counties and you expand or contract them to reflect their new weight in population as released by the census, here's the real map of Virginia. This is the population, political map of Virginia. This is where representation comes from. Look at Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Tidewater. Again, think of how small they were on the geographic map. Look how big they are on the political map. You can barely find rural Virginia anymore except in the Southwest. So, and that's happening in every state. Those of you from other states, you can do this at home. You can try this at home. Don't try this at home. No, try this at home. Even the kids can do it with crayons, assuming they have the population figures. And it's fun. And you see what your state really looks like politically. All right, we talked about the House in 2012. Let's talk about the Senate in 2012. And I think here the prospects look quite good for Republicans, certainly to gain seats and maybe to take over the Senate. They'll come very close to taking over if they don't take over, because there are so many vulnerable Democrats up. Just look at the way the seats fell, a third up every 2 years, and you have to look back 6 years to see who was elected 6 years ago. Well, 6 years ago, 2006, was a very Democratic year. And when you have very Democratic years or very Republican years, you tend to elect some weak sisters, shall we say, or weak brothers in this case. And as a consequence, they're very vulnerable when they come up for re-election. Senator Tester in Montana, I think, will be hard-pressed to win again. Senator McCaskill in Missouri will be hard-pressed to win again. Senator Nelson, Ben Nelson in Nebraska, I don't know how he wins again. The Republican nominee for president, even if Obama's reelected, the Republican nominee is going to get 70% or so in Nebraska, and that makes it really tough for an incumbent Democrat to win another term in the Senate. And there are lots of others that we could talk about. You add them all up, and you're going to, you know, I think the minimum Republicans could pick up is 3. Well, that would make it a 50-50 tie in the Senate to be broken by the new vice president, whether it's the old one or a new Republican one. And it's easy to see how Republicans could get to 4 or 5. So it's going to be interesting to think about that. If Obama's reelected, he's probably, not definitely, it's too early to say, but probably going to have a Republican Congress in full, a Republican House and maybe a Republican Senate too, which will change the dynamics enormously for his second term if he gets one. And, you know, we'll limit him. And I think if there was a message out of 2010, other than the Tea Party and the debt and various things you can think of, it was that people want checks and balances. Americans are very much like that. They don't trust either party when you get right down to it. They don't want either party to have full control because they've seen what happens. When the Republicans get full control, the train goes too far to the right, goes off the tracks. When the Democrats have full control, the train goes off the track to the left. And so if you get both parties with some role in government, maybe you have a little more balance. It's closer to the picture of the American public, which is relatively moderate. Relatively moderate. The parties don't represent the public in that sense. One party's left-wing, the other party's right-wing. The people are more or less in the middle. They're moderate conservative, they're moderate liberal, they're right dead on center. So in an odd way, Americans have built in another check and balance that the founders didn't think of because, of course, they didn't want parties. They weren't pro-party. They didn't imagine this system would develop the way it did. And we've kind of corrected for that problem and built in a check and balance. So that's what, 2012, I think the Republicans have a good shot here. And I can tell you by 2014, if Obama wins a second term, if you can get some bookie in Las Vegas to take an early bet, go ahead and take some money out of that 401k, because I guarantee you're going to win. If the Republicans don't take over in 2012, if it's, say, a tied Senate, they're guaranteed in 2014. It will be the 6th-year itch if Obama gets a second term. And you see, once again, you got 20 Democratic seats up, just 13 Republican seats. We could go around the country. I won't bore you on a Sunday morning, but I could analyze these seats for you, and I can see how Republicans are going to pick up additional seats in 2014. So, again, I think the direction is clear in the Senate. It's heading toward the Republicans either in 2012 or 2014. Let's get to the presidency. I'll talk about this, and we'll take your questions. And this summarizes the whole election. I've used this graph for years because it's really what 2012 is going to be about. Is Barack Obama going to be the next Jimmy Carter, who was incredibly unlucky, who had 2 recessions within 18 months of the election? You want to get your recessions over early, which is what Obama thought he had done, and yet the economy's slowing again. Now, I don't think it'll go back. I doubt we'll have a double dip, but we're having economic problems again at just the wrong time if this continues. Maybe it's a blip. I don't know. I'm not an economist. My other habits are fairly good. I can't tell you whether it's a blip or not. But if it is more than a blip, if it is a serious economic slowdown, then you're looking at Jimmy Carter. Because people, it's unfair. People always hold an incumbent president responsible for bad times. They don't create the bad times. They really don't. They affect the edges of the economy. Presidents are given way too much credit for good times, far too much blame for bad times, but that's the way the system works. That is the bargain when you run for elective office. You benefit from good times, you're punished in bad times. Fairness has nothing to do with it. So I always say life isn't fair, and politics is the least fair part of life. So will he be Jimmy Carter? Mr. Unlucky, at least he got Osama bin Laden as opposed to the disaster in the desert for Jimmy Carter. Or will he be Bill Clinton? Will things click at just the right moment? Will the economy roar at just the right moment, which it did for Clinton? And, you know, Clinton was so lucky he even timed his sex scandals. They were never in an election year. They were always at other times. And, you know, considering how many there really were, that's impressive. That's luck. Luck is such a big part of politics, and we never acknowledge it. You know, it's always, oh, this one is so skilled. He's such a great campaigner. This one is such a terrible campaigner. Malarkey. It's mainly luck. So it's either going to be Carter or Clinton, and we don't know. And presidents running for re-election, I love this. My staff, Joe, just designed this. Presidents running for re-election either cruise, isn't this great, or they lose, meaning that most presidents who run for re-election do not have close races. George W. Bush was the exception, but he still did better in 2004 than he did in 2000. Clinton did much better the second time around. Reagan did much better the second time around. Nixon did much better the second time around. And if they are not doing better than they did the second time around, they usually lose. They almost always lose, as George H.W. Bush did, as Jimmy Carter did, with one exception, which has a Virginia connection. And of course, it's Woodrow Wilson. There's Mr. What you know, he was a graduate student. He was in the Graduate Arts and Sciences and Law School, as you remember. In let's see, it was here for a year. I think it was 1879. Check me. I know it was Rutherford B. Hayes' presidency, so it must have been 1879. And so he has a Virginia connection, and we're I think proud of that. It depends on which piece of Wilson's legacy you're focusing on as to whether you're proud or not. But he did worse. He nearly lost the second term, but he won it. So he was the exception to the rule that presidents who do worse the second time around, at least in the Electoral College, end up losing their seats. So what will matter, what will determine the results, even if we can't proclaim them a year and a half ahead of the election? No one will be foolish enough to do that. You saw this week, if you read the New York Times, or even if you didn't because it was on all the networks, there was a column in the New York Times that oversimplified the election and said, since Franklin Roosevelt, no president with an unemployment rate of higher than 7.2% has been reelected. And I can guarantee you, in the simplistic world we live in, with the simplistic media we have, that has now become the new yardstick, and you'll hear it all the way to November of 2012. And it's malarkey. It's bunk. It's picking one data point out of a lot of interesting information. Notice they said since Franklin Roosevelt. Why? Because when Roosevelt was elected in 1932, there was a 19% unemployment rate. He was reelected in 1936 with a 17% unemployment rate, and then an unprecedented third term in 1940 with a 15% unemployment rate. And then you look at the other side of the question. If unemployment was the only thing that mattered, Hubert Humphrey would have won in a landslide in 1968. We had full employment, little over 3% unemployment. We'll never see that again, never. In fact, it's probably not healthy. It probably generates inflation and other things. But 3%. Al Gore should have won in a landslide. In 2000, we had a 3.9% unemployment rate. It was incredibly low historically. So obviously that's not the only thing that matters in determining who wins a presidential election. What does matter? The number I look at, and I'm not going to be simplistic and say it's the only thing that matters, but one number I look at and pay a lot more attention to than I do the unemployment rate is the overall growth rate, the growth of gross domestic product. And looking historically, it generally has to be somewhere around 3% on an annual basis, a 3% growth rate. Where are we now? 1.8%. We're way below where Obama wants it and needs to have it to win. Now, could he win with a 2.8? Yeah. I mean, it has to be around 3. And again, the opponent will matter, as we'll discuss. Obama's job approval. You're going to look at one number that kind of summarizes everything. Look where his approval is as we get into the election season. Not now. He's riding this bump from Osama bin Laden, and he deserved it. But, you know, 51, he's at 51, 52%, depending on which average you look at. I like the ones on Real Clear Politics, that great website. If you don't use that, you should. You should look at Real Clear Politics right after you look at the crystal ball, which is the most important one, and the one you should be getting every Thursday. Any loyal Wahoo who does not get the crystal ball on Thursday is disloyal. And I want to make that clear. And it's free. It's free. What do you want? You go and you sign up and it's free, and you get a political update every Thursday, and then you can enjoy the other 6 days. See, that's the way to look at it. And yeah, there's a little button there to click for contributions. It's just like politics. Constant fundraising. That's what we now say that all faculty members must have a PhD. PhD as in funding. That's what we do nowadays. Anyway, 50%. You got to be a president to get reelected has to be around 50% or above. If we have cases where presidents in split races have had 48%, 49% approval rating. You can do it that way, but it's the hard way. You really should be around 50 if you're going to get reelected. This next point I'll make in a moment again when we get to the Republicans. But look, the Republicans can't control the economy. Nobody can control the economy. They can't control what happens in foreign affairs. Maybe Obama will continue to knock off leaders of Al-Qaeda. Let's hope he does. They can't control whether there's a scandal or not. On the crystal ball, we had a fascinating piece a week ago using statistics only, totally nonpartisan, to predict that there will be a major executive branch scandal before the election in 2012, just on historical patterns. There hasn't been one in Obama's term. He's gone the second longest any president has gone in modern times without a major executive branch scandal. Only George W. Bush went longer. He went from January of 2001 all the way to October 2003 when the Valerie Plame scandal broke. And Obama will hit that in October if he gets that far. But it's a near 100% chance statistically of a major executive branch scandal. What will it be? I don't know. Somebody asked me the other day, and I'm just guessing, but when the federal government, I know, Governor, you're going to agree with this, when the federal government spends trillions of dollars quickly, probably some of it is corrupt spending or misused or poorly done or inefficient. That's just a guess. I'd like to have that experience, to try and spend trillions quickly. I know what I'd spend it on. You didn't get that. The Center for Politics. We'd be the biggest center in the entire world. Okay, and I'd give a little to the medical center. I think it's important that we not die. That would be the other thing that I would do. All right, but anyway, there's one thing the Republicans can control, and only one thing. Their nominee. Their nominee. And it's going to be interesting to see because, again, there's so many ideologues in politics on both sides. Will Republicans focus on the only thing that matters? Picking a nominee that most swing voters can imagine sitting in the Oval Office making life and death decisions. Now that eliminates 3/4 of the Republican field. I'm serious. Now you got to think like a swing voter thinks, not an ideologue. Because the ideologues say, oh, anybody'd be better than Obama. You know, I'd vote for a mouse. I'd vote for a worm. You know, well, that's not how the swing voter thinks. Okay? You have to vote for someone who can win, who attracts those independents and swing voters. And it's just amazing how many people won't do it. War and peace and terrorism, you never know what's going to happen in those fields. They will have some effect, we'll see. Social issues move millions of voters. We'll see what happens on that front. I just mentioned scandal. And money and organization, you put that right in Obama's column. He's going to raise more than anybody's ever raised by a mile. He set the new record in 2008 with $750 million, and he's certainly going to hit $1 billion this time. $1 billion. The Republican, because of the nomination battle, will be lucky to raise and spend $500 million. So at a minimum, it'll be a 2-to-1 margin. Could be more than that for the Democrats, and that buys a lot of organization. That helps with your turnout. And really, the question always comes down to turnout. Is it going to be like '08 when you had a record number of people voting, the most since the 1960s, 62% of adults, disproportionate numbers of young people, of Hispanics, African Americans, Asian Americans, who were very inclined to vote for Obama by margins of 66 all the way up to 96%? Or is it going to be a lower turnout because people are disillusioned, they don't have jobs, they're unhappy, they're not going to vote Republican, these other groups I just mentioned, but they don't want to give Obama a second term, so they stay home? If you have a lower turnout like 2010, which was 41, 42%, in other words, it was 20 points below the presidential race, that's going to be a more Republican electorate because it's going to be disproportionately white, disproportionately older, and ideologically driven by opponents of the Democrats. We'll see. There's no way you're going to get a turnout below 50%. It's going to be in the 50s, and if it goes to 60, if I knew today the turnout would be 60 or above, I'd just predict Obama easily. That's going to be the question. If it's 60% or above, we'll have to see what happens. Now, on the Democratic side, no liberal challenge, which is key. Now, this is, again, you can cherry pick statistics, but in modern times, every president who has been unopposed for renomination has, in fact, won a second term. It's the presidents who get an opponent, a serious opponent for renomination, who lose in November. So far, there's nothing. Clinton and Biden may face each other in 2016. I have a hard time believing Biden has already staked his ground. He's going to be like 73 or 74 in 2016. I have a hard time believing people will buy that one. It's one thing to be an incumbent like Reagan seeking re-election. Reagan was 73, seeking a second term. And even that, it was dicey because as we later learned, with the Alzheimer's, you have to be careful with things like that. Hillary Clinton will be a youngster. She will be a mere 68. Who knows whether she will be interested, but we'll see. There'll be lots of other candidates on the Democratic side. The real question is, what do the Republicans do now? And they will have decided probably by this time next year. You've really only got two candidates in the Tier 1 category, and I define Tier 1 as being people who can pass that test easily of sitting in the Oval Office making life and death decisions. Of the candidates who are in there, in the Republican field right now, Mitt Romney, we all know his problems, Mormonism and flip-flopping and Romney care. But he headed the Olympics and he was Massachusetts governor, and people will say, it doesn't excite me, but he's a legitimate candidate for president. You have to pass that threshold. He passes it. So does Tim Pawlenty, former governor of Minnesota. Not very exciting. You don't have to be exciting to pass that threshold. And he passes it. Two-term governor of Minnesota. He's going to make reasonable decisions of one sort or another. Now, the three that Republicans are hoping will get in, or at least one will get in, of course, Chris Christie is the one they pine for, and I doubt he runs. I think he's already made that clear. I suppose there's some chance that if the Republican field doesn't take hold by the fall, that he'll wake up one morning, look in the mirror, and see a president. Frequently they do, but it's tough to get somebody who has made categorical statements about not running the way he has. I'm not ready to be president. I don't know enough. You play those in videotapes, and it can be devastating. Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, again, I just don't see it. We call him governor for life. Unlike Virginia with the one-term limit, they have unlimited terms. He got in December 2000, just succeeded Bush. He was a lieutenant governor, and he's been reelected and reelected. And incredibly, I learned recently in Texas, he wants to run again in 2014. He's already the longest serving governor in Texas history. You just can't get him out of there. Thank God for term limits. I know you don't like the one term. Governor Gilmore and I fight about the one term limit. I'm in favor, he's not. But 2 terms is a reasonable compromise, though I'm right. We could go along with the 2 terms. Anyway, Rick Perry, I don't think he'll even get in. He's just playing with it and having fun. Paul Ryan, he's left the door ajar now. First he said no, now he's leaving it ajar. It would be suicidal for the Republicans to nominate him. First of all, the House thing. You're a House member. He doesn't strike me as James A. Garfield. Now, he strikes me more as James A. Garfield than Michelle Bachmann does. But it's not a wise thing to nominate a House member for president. They haven't run statewide. They haven't dealt with a lot of the issues you have to deal with in big, broad constituencies. And of course, then there's the Meta-Scare part of his budget plan. Now, Republicans will ask for it if they nominate Paul Ryan, and I don't think they will. I don't think he'll even run. So the bracketed people probably won't run. Tier 2, at the top of it, is the 3rd candidate who could pass that test of sitting in the Oval Office making life and death decisions, former Utah Governor John Huntsman. Unless the conservatives split 6 ways to Sunday for 6 months, I just can't see someone as moderate as John Huntsman winning the Republican nomination. First of all, he's got the McCain staff working for him again. And the one thing I've heard from Republicans is never again. They don't want John McCain all over again. And he's got McCain's campaign manager, and a lot of the McCain people are working for him. He's very moderate. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just saying in the Republican constituency, to be moderate on climate change, on gay rights, on a whole series of issues. How do you get through the Republican process when you're as moderate as he is? And then he served as Obama's ambassador to China. I guess you can explain that. I was responding patriotically to a call for my country. The problem is there are these letters back and forth in which he praises Obama as brilliant, one of the best presidents ever. See, that tends to be a killer with Republicans because they don't view Obama that way. But you never know. His father's a billionaire. He says he won't spend family money. I've heard that one before. He could buy it. You never know. Michelle Bachmann is doing really well with the Republican constituency groups. Goldwater, 38%. You nominate Michelle Bachmann, and I'm going to bet you get below 40% of the vote. I mean, we're talking about somebody who is way out there. And that's why she excites the activists in Iowa. 60% of the caucus goers in Iowa are conservative, fundamentalist Christians. That's why they love her. The problem is the national electorate doesn't look like that. And Bachmann, as I say, is way out there. Newt Gingrich, he's already self-destructed. We don't need to spend much time on Newt. Sarah Palin, again, as I've said many, many times, if she's not, I don't think she's running. This was a cry for attention. Here I am, remember me? And it was like the old American Express ads. Remember me? We had Bill Miller, who was the vice presidential candidate in 1964 for the Republicans. And I'll bet you 99.9% of the people in this room didn't know that. Bill Miller, congressman from New York. You did. I said 99.9. I knew you all knew it. You're heckling me. Now, you didn't like this when you were in office. You're heckling me. In any event, Sarah Palin, if she's nominated, I don't think she's even running. And I don't think she'll be nominated if she runs, because I think Republicans know people have made up their minds about Sarah Palin. She's a loser in the fall. But if she's nominated, the Republican platform will be the longest suicide note ever written. And that's just the way it is. Rick Santorum, there's no way he can get over explaining how, as an incumbent senator, he lost his seat by 18 percentage points in 2006. You can lose by a little and come back. 18 percentage points when you're the incumbent? It wasn't that Democratic a year. Rudy Giuliani and George Pataki obviously have been, smoking something you can't get at the corner drugstore. There's just no question about it. Rudy Giuliani was the front runner for a year and ended up with one delegate. He self-destructed. Nothing's happened in 4 years that will make him more palatable for Republicans. And most New Yorkers don't even remember George Pataki was governor. So that's not going to happen. Tier 3, Herman Cain, again, getting loads of attention. Now, think about this. You're going to nominate the CEO of Godfather's Pizza, ex-CEO of Godfather's Pizza, who not only has never held public office, but lost the one race he ran for the Senate in Georgia by a wide margin. It makes no sense. Again, people are responding with their hearts and not their heads. And it's a long way until the nominating process. I think they'll get around to listening to their heads. Ron Paul, no comment. Gary Johnson, libertarian. His main plank is the legalization of drugs. He's running in the wrong party. Buddy Roemer, if you can explain him to me, you let me know. I don't get it at all. Former governor of Louisiana. And this is how nutty it's getting on the Republican side. Thaddeus McCotter is running. I'm sure you all know him, that obscure congressman from Michigan. No, there's no reason to know him. The fact that someone like Thaddeus McCotter, that no one on Capitol Hill has even heard from, is running for president tells you how chaotic it is on the Republican side. But I'll make you a prediction. We got a long way to go. By the time we get to the end of this year, the field will have sorted itself out. In a lot of ways, the Republicans will be in a much better position to pick a legitimate candidate who can compete. As long as they think they have a chance to beat Obama, they're going to pick somebody who can beat Obama. If they think they have no chance at all, then they made like in '64, where it was over from the beginning, because America was not going to have 3 presidents in a year. We weren't going to do that. It was obvious from the moment Kennedy was assassinated. It was never going to happen. So the Republicans said, what the hell? And they said, we'll go with our hearts. We'll go, in your hearts, he's right. Barry Goldwater, 38%. If they think they have no chance, then they could go off the rails and nominate one of these other people. Here's the current electoral map, and I factored in the economy as it is now. I don't know what it will be in a year and a half. I've changed 2 states. For now, I have put North Carolina and Indiana in the Republican camp. For now. Remember, they were very close. North Carolina was the closest Obama win, 10 or 12,000 votes. It's nothing. Now, the Democrats have their convention in North Carolina. They may do a lot of organizing. They realize they have an uphill battle there to win North Carolina's 15 electoral votes again. Indiana, I just think that was a fluke based on all the factors that were operating in 2008. And I don't think Missouri is open. Obama barely lost Missouri in 2008. I don't think that's an open question, particularly for 2012. So when you add up the leans and the likelies, and we can discuss any of these that you want, Obama starts off with 247. You need 270 to win. The Republican has 206, and you see the toss-ups there. Virginia being a very prominent one, and it is. And you say, oh, that was a fluke too. Nope. Virginia gave nearly 53% to Obama. That was a wide margin. Again, because of that map I showed you. The demographic and racial changes in Virginia have transformed the state in some years. When you have low turnout years, like 2009, Republicans can win. When you have high turnout years like 2008, forget about it. So that's what you look for. But Virginia gave nearly 53%. Compare that to Ohio. I think a lot of us tend to think of Ohio as an industrial state with big unions as being more democratic. Obama only got 51% in Ohio. He got 53% in Virginia. So you better believe Virginia is a toss-up. And the Senate race will go the way of the presidential contest in Virginia. Whichever party wins the presidency, I think will take the Senate seat. Florida, obviously, Ohio, Iowa, New Hampshire, Colorado, Nevada. Nevada is leaning blue because of the tremendous growth of the Hispanic vote, but I leave that open because 2008 was their first Democratic vote in a long, long time. So it's up for grabs a year and a half in advance, 247 to 206 with 85 toss-ups. you know, that's a race. That's a race. If the economy continues where it is or weakens further, you can put most of those toss-ups in the Republican camp. If the economy strengthens and what we're in now is a blip, you can put most of those toss-ups in the Democratic camp. But that's where it is today, a year and a half in advance. I don't think anything is going to happen much except for the third idea there. You got no challenge from the left. Oh, I heard this morning Howard Dean said Sarah Palin could be a very tough opponent for President Obama. That's how I know she's a loser. Howard Dean said that she could do well. Bloomberg isn't running. The Obama people have done a good job cultivating him. But don't rule out the possibility that some faction in the Tea Party could run an independent candidate for president. They're in the process of getting disillusioned. It's so easy to see. They want far more than the Republicans in the House can possibly deliver dealing with the Democratic Senate and Democratic president. Can't do it. And they're going to get disillusioned. They're going to call the Republicans sellouts. They're going to look, some of them are going to look for somebody who can get 1, 2, 3, 4% of the vote. Subtract 80% of that from the Republican column. I mean, if you see anyone who's reasonably prominent, who can be presented as a credible alternative, running as an independent Tea Party candidate, that's obviously a tremendous boost for President Obama. And we conclude, go to our website, centerforpolitics.org, order The Crystal Ball, great new book, makes a wonderful holiday gift, Pendulum Swing, about the Republican victories in 2010. We do one every 2 years on the elections. We want to preserve the history of the elections for people now who want to learn about them, and maybe for scholars in 100 years. It's easy to forget the details, and we're trying to present them in as unbiased and nonpartisan a way as we can. As I always conclude, he who lives by the crystal ball ends up eating ground glass. I've tried to be careful in these predictions, seeing that some of you were taking notes. I saw you. If only you'd done that in class. Many of you never took a note in class, so you were sitting there playing video games. I know what you were doing. You were on Facebook. I've seen that. At least the newer ones are. The other students didn't have those opportunities, but the newer ones, you know, they've got those laptops open, and they look like they're paying attention, and then you have a TA go behind them, and you see the Facebook page, and they're doing email and you know, the video games and all the rest of it. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Parents, if you're sending your kids and paying those big tuition bills, keep this in mind. Anyway, let me take some questions. I know you all want to get on the road, but we're going to take some questions. Yes, ma'am. She asked if I would consider running. I love what I do, and I have too much confidence in the electorate to think they'd ever vote for me. So absolutely not. Also, you know, last year at this, I'll tell you this is embarrassing for me, but last year I was at this event, and I talked about whether some of these candidates were running, like Chris Christie and Al Gore and this one and that one, and I said, you know, the best indication is whether they go on a diet. When they go on a diet, they're either dating again or they're running for higher office. It's one or the other. So I went home, and I'm on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. You're supposed to say that. It's 140 characters. It's not hard for you. You can do Twitter as opposed to Facebook, which takes a lot of time. I don't do Facebook, but Twitter. Anyway, I went home and I went on Twitter. I try to tweet a couple times a day. And one part of Twitter, whenever you're mentioned, it pops up. And you look at what people are saying about something you said. And an alumnus who was right here, I'm glad to say, in a prior class, he may even be dead because I tried to find him. But this alumnus actually said, Sabato says you have to lose weight to run for office. I now know for sure Sabato isn't running. And that's from a member of my own family. That's the way I look at you people. That hurt. And I hope I'm not going to go home and see something like that today, because I will find you. I'm Italian. I will find you. All right, let me get a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
Is Jeb Bush a credible candidate?
Is Jeb Bush a credible candidate? He's absolutely not running in 12, not going to do it. Is he interested in 2016? Is the Pope German? Yes. You know, but he wanted 8 years between Bush presidencies. That's what we've done before. So, you know, that's nicely spaced. Every 8 years, you get a Bush. Maybe it'll be Bush versus Clinton. So we can keep up the pretense that we have a democracy instead of an autocracy or an oligarchy.
I have another question.
Yes.
I'd be interested in who former Governor Gilmore is supporting.
For president? I don't know. Who are you supporting? Nobody. Okay, that is a very wise decision. You're supporting the nominee, right? You're supporting the nominee of your, oh, maybe, he says maybe. That's also smart. All right, what else we got here? Yes, somebody over here.
Yes, sir. I think you've already answered the ultimate question, but how do you see the possible Alan Kane Senate race in Virginia?
It'll go the way of the presidential election. I really do believe that. It's a classic coattail race. Look, let me put it to you this way. How many people do you think are going to vote for Barack Obama and then vote for George Allen? Now think about those two people, okay? You can number them on one hand, and most of them will be mistakes in the polling booth. Similarly, how many Republicans are going to vote for the prior Democratic National Committee chairman whose image has become much more partisan? Now, you know, if you're not a partisan, I tell you there's a solution to this. We're not lost, he's still with us, he's going to be a consultant, but one of the greatest people here at the University of Virginia in modern times who's done wonderful things for the university is Leonard Sandridge, you know, our executive vice president who's stepping down right about now, I guess, or maybe it's the end of this month, I don't know. So when he retired, some of you may have been at this event, we launched a campaign for Senate. I'm going to write in, I can tell you right now, I'm writing in Leonard Sandridge. I have the stickers with me. They're in orange and blue, and that's my solution. I usually write in anyway for all the races, so I don't get committed even psychologically to a candidate. I'm voting for Leonard Sandridge. We came up with his slogan, which I would also use, not just another pretty face. I think it worked for Lincoln. It worked for Lincoln. I think it's a great slogan. Okay, what else? Yes.
Can you tell me if the results in the New York 26th district and the Ryan Medicare plan are going to affect next year's race?
Well, the New York 26, of course, was the special held a couple of weeks ago, special election for House, in a seat that was so Republican, even that insane guy, Carl Palladino, that the Republicans nominated for governor, who lost in a landslide to Andrew Cuomo in a heavily Republican year. They voted for Palladino in New York 26. So in the beginning, nobody thought that that could go Democratic. Now, it was a three-way race. You had an independent with a big checkbook getting 8% of the vote. And so he took most of that from the Republican candidate. But you know, if it had been a two-way race, I still think the Democrat would have won by a handful of votes. Looking at the precinct patterns and the town patterns there, I think the Democrats still would have won. And there's no question, every Republican, they can't say this publicly, they kind of dance around it because the Ryan plan has become gospel in Republican circles. They're not allowed to say anything bad about the Ryan plan, except privately, every single one of them says it killed us. The Metascare part of it. I'm not saying the Democrats were fair about it. Again, there's nothing fair about politics. It was the Metascare. It was the Ryan plan that elected the Democrat. Now, will that continue for a year and a half? Only if the Republicans don't do something. They have to do something to pull back from that portion of the Ryan plan. They just can't do what he proposed, which is a semi-privatization of Medicare. Why can't they do it? Because older people, who are now the most heavily Republican part of the electorate, don't want it. And they will vote Democratic rather than let the Republicans do that. So it's a democracy, folks, a representative democracy. You have to deal with it, whether you like it or not. What else? Yes, Governor Gilmore. He needs a mic. Now, you've done this once or twice. You know how to use this mic. Okay. Just kidding.
considering the modern influence of the primaries and money in presidential nomination contests, do the Republicans still control their own nominating process?
Do Republicans still control their own nominating process because of the primaries? Well, you know, look, it depends on who participates. And I think you're suggesting that non-Republicans are voting in these primaries. Is that one of your suggestions? Well, all I can tell you is there have been some studies in my field about who votes in partisan primaries, and overwhelmingly it's the partisans. The crossover rate is usually about 2%. That is, of the turnout on the primary day, only about 2% of the people who vote are from the other party, maybe trying to meddle. Or some of them may simply be partisans of the other party in name only, and they're more attracted to the candidates on the other side. So I really don't agree that, that primaries hijack the nominating process from either the Democrats or the Republicans. I just don't think the evidence is there. We can all cite very specific cases. We remember a 1977 Democratic primary in Virginia where the Republicans went in, and I think in a very close race, did nominate the weaker Democratic candidate for governor. But that is really exceptional. There aren't many cases like that. That's my guess. Yes, we got one back here.
Yes, I'm just kind of curious if you were going to put together for the Republican Party your ideal ticket, you know, given emotion, given the independents, given the media, which two would you put on a ticket to say, hey, this is going to be the best possible opportunity?
Well, I'm going to work with the ones who are running. I can't pick people who aren't running because then you get into loads of people who might be great but aren't running. But of the ones who are running, let's say you have Pawlenty, because he has the fewest negatives. He's bland, but he has fewest negatives. He's going to turn off fewer people in all probability. Not that he's perfect. He's not going to carry Minnesota. He won 2 races for governor with well under 50% in 3-way races. He's not going to carry Minnesota. It's a heavily Democratic state. But because he served for 8 years in a Democratic state, he actually knows how to talk to Democrats, particularly blue-collar Democrats. Now, he's from a northern state, so you'd pick somebody from a southern state. What's the fastest growing demographic group that is still movable, where Republicans have to do much better if they're to have any future in national politics? That's right, Hispanics and Latinos. So you pick Marco Rubio, senator from Florida. Will he run? I don't know. He's already said, no, I'm not going to take the VP spot. They always say that prior to getting the call. Oh, the nominee was so persuasive. You know, I didn't want to do it, but you get Marco Rubio, again, Florida, he would help to carry Florida, boom, mega state, giant packet of electoral votes, and Texas. Republicans would finally, would not have a lily white ticket. They'd have a minority on the ticket. It would have some effect with Hispanics in Nevada and Colorado and New Mexico and some of the states that are movable. To me, it's ideal. You know, frankly, you get 2 white guys on the Republican ticket, unless the economy's really bad, I think it hurts them. But we're in a new age. Never forget, between 2040 and 2050, America will cease being majority white, the country, between 2040 and 2050. Deal with it. It's reality. Don't live in the past. Yes. Is that right? Oh, it's Richard? I can't see. Can't see that far anymore, Richard.
All right. Instead
Richard Marks, government honor student, great government honor student.
Class of 66.
Class of 66.
Instead of a scandal, how about a budget impasse that has the same kind of corrosive effect? Assess what it might mean both for the Democrats and the Republicans, particularly if it's preceded by a couple of steps such as a Moody's downgrading of the U.S. government bond rating with the effects that'll have on the market.
Richard, of course, you know, we're not just talking this time about a budget impasse as we were in 1995. We're talking about the debt limit. And, you know, if we reach that debt limit, a lot of disastrous things are going to happen. They really are. And both sides admit it privately. That sets up a completely different dynamic than existed in 1995, and I just don't believe that it will happen, because if it does, the effect may be anti-incumbent. It will absolutely hurt Obama as the incumbent president, because we always hold presidents responsible for what happens or doesn't happen on their watch. But it will also be obvious that the Republicans will not agree, and I think many of them will fall too. And that's enough incentive for the two parties to get together, even if they have to cut and trim, and they come up with a deal, as I suspect they will, that will take us to the end of 2012, conveniently, right past the election, so that once you get past the election, then, as they always say, we'll deal with this issue seriously once it isn't election season anymore. Our problem today is it's always election season. It's always election season. I celebrate that, but I think it's bad for the country. Yes?
Larry, let's look at your crystal ball on what's the political solution going to be in Medicare? Anyone who believes we're going to computerize our way out of this, that's a pipe dream. Look at the health of the American public. Our checkbook is getting a little thin, so there's going to be some political solution. Let's see, 5 years from now we'll ask that, we'll see.
What's the solution? Lots and lots of pain. Same with Social Security. You know, nobody wants to raise the retirement age. Nobody wants to means test. On Medicare, nobody wants to means test. Nobody wants to cut procedures available widely. You know, the problem is that once you run out of money, or you're very close to that, you have no choice. And we're going to get to that point. And we had, in April, we had a wonderful panel. The Senator brought together Senator Alan Simpson, who, of course, is the Bowles-Simpson Commission. And, you know, you can criticize their commission report all you want. They at least cut between $4 and $5 trillion from the debt. That's a pretty good start. Let's give them credit for that. It wasn't easy to do that, to reach a bipartisan agreement to do that. And we had some other people on the panel, too, on various sides of the issue. But as the point he made over and over is absolutely valid. The sooner we deal with this, the less painful it will be, because we can stretch it out over 10, 20 years. And I'm not saying it won't be painful. It will be painful even if we did it today. But imagine waiting until 11:59 as the clock is moving toward, midnight, like the old nuclear clock. Remember nuclear destruction? Now we're dating ourselves, those of us who remember that clock that was always a few minutes from midnight. We're facing the same thing with entitlements. And we either deal with it, or we saddle your children and grandchildren, the kids that I teach every semester, with enormous debt and, frankly, a retirement that won't be worth having, and probably a life that won't be worth having. So we have the obligation to deal with it. We will, as a country, we will, but I worry about when. The sooner the better. But we're already going to kick the ball down the road. They're going to do some things, but not nearly enough. I'll bet it's not nearly enough. And then we'll be right back here, in 2012 and the beginning of 2013, with a window of 3 or 4 months before the next campaign season gets underway, to deal with a massive problem. We got one up here. Well, you got one back there. In the meantime, you can bring a mic up here.
Larry, we are from Wisconsin, and not too many people here from Wisconsin. My question to you is twofold. The first part of the question is, how aware are the people in this part of the world, in the South, of what has happened in the industrial Midwest in the last 20 years? How aware are they of that? And secondly, how does that awareness, or lack of awareness, affect the political future?
Well, I want to open by saying you lost a great Wisconsinite yesterday. For those of you who were partying, you may not know former Secretary of State Larry Eagleburger died, and we were lucky to have him here in Charlottesville and Albemarle. He lived in Albemarle for many years. He was the only career Foreign Service officer to ever become Secretary of State. And he retired here, and he taught many of my classes. He was always a big hit. He was so blunt, tough talking, and funny. This guy was one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. I mean, he could cut to the quick faster than anyone I knew about an issue or a politician, and we regret that. And he always identified with Wisconsin, and they identified with him. Every time I went to Wisconsin when he was living, people would say, "How's Larry Eagleburger?" They had a great marriage of interest there. So we regret his passing. But how aware are we? Well, I think we're more aware because of what's happened in the last 6 months. In general, I don't think people have focused on Wisconsin in particular. We focused more on Ohio and on some of the other industrial states, Michigan, I think in particular, which has been in a one-state depression for longer than the Great Depression lasted for the country as a whole. I mean, that is really our state in the deepest hole. Having said that, there's always room to know more. There's always, I don't know what particular issues you're focusing on. I will tell you this. Are there problems there? There are very serious problems there. And the infrastructure is deteriorating, and a lot of it has to do with people moving to the south, and the heartland has deteriorated because of the decline of hard industry that once made America great and all the rest of it. But if you want to get some hope, you want to have some hope, I want you to go to YouTube and I want you to Google this great 9-minute video. Some of you may have seen a piece of it on TV on Friday. It's a video. Google Grand Rapids lip dub, Lipdub, or just Grand Rapids, Michigan. This will come up. Recently, I think it was Newsweek, designated 10 dying cities in America. How'd you like to be on that list if you lived in a city? 10 dying cities. Who's going to invest in a dying city? What business is going to want to move to a dying city? Grand Rapids was one of the dying cities. And what did some of the other cities do? What did they do? They protested and they wrote nasty letters to Newsweek. How could you? How dare you? Grand Rapids took a completely different tack. They shut down their city on a Sunday. They got virtually the whole town involved in producing this video about Grand Rapids, Michigan, which of course was in the heart of Gerald Ford's congressional district, the one he represented from 46 to 1973. This was once a very important part of America. When you see this video, which is set to Don McLean's American Pie, you will know that the heartland is still alive, still kicking, still full of energy and possibilities. I want you to see this because this wasn't produced by government. This was done privately. Citizens got together and said, we're not going to let this be the image of our area, our heartland area. We're going to change it. We're going to show them what we can do. Wait till you see this thing. You'll want to send money to Grand Rapids. Even those of you who are cheap, you'll want to send money to Grand Rapids. So you can Google it as well. Grand Rapids lip dub. I want you to write that down, right under the notes you've taken, contribute to the Center for Politics, write lip dub, Grand Rapids lip dub. You do it now. And send me an email and say, tell me what you thought of it. I think it's great. I sent it to all my staff. We're gonna use it in programs because we can change things. We can deal with this Medicare problem. We can deal with Social Security. We can deal with these things if we have the will. And it has to come from the bottom to the top, not from the top down. Things never happen in America that way. All right, we got another one here. We're losing our crowd. They run out of breakfast. Tom Falders, you didn't order enough breakfast wherever you are. There's not enough over there. Okay.
I may be repackaging the governor's question, and I would like to know what you think about the role that money is going to play in the nominations and the elections. I ask because one of my earliest political lessons was watching Senator Spong fall to Mr. Scott with Nixon money in this state in the 60s. But on the other hand, I watched Carly Fiorina and Christy Todd Whitman get nothing for all the money they spent in California in the last election round.
a very balanced question, and good for you for pointing out both sides. If you're running for office, would you want to have more money than your opponents? You bet. Of course you would. You'd want to have 20 times more money. And does it help? You bet it helps. Is it the only thing? Is it the alpha and the omega politics? Absolutely not. You cited Carly Fiorina. The better example would have been the Republican gubernatorial candidate who lost in a landslide to Jerry Brown. Losing a landslide to Jerry Brown. And she spent more money than any human being has ever spent in American history out of one's own pocket for public office. She outspent him by a massive margin, and he won in a landslide. I'm not endorsing Jerry Brown. I think he's nuts, like everybody else does. But I'm just simply telling you, money is not the alpha and the omega of politics. And look, I remember, it's wonderful that you remember Bill Spong. He's one of the finest public servants I've ever known. It was a tragedy. He was not saying that in a partisan sense, he was a one-term senator. He was headed to be majority leader in the Senate. Oh, what he could have gotten for Virginia. We would have had the Center for Politics 30 years ago if we had had Bill Spong as majority leader. That was back when earmarks were okay. But he was not defeated by money. He was defeated by the Nixon landslide. In Virginia, this is hard to believe, in Virginia, Nixon got 70% of the vote in 1972, and Spong got 46%. Okay, McGovern got 30, and Spong managed to get 16% more than McGovern, which was a miracle that he got that much more. So it had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with Richard Nixon. But thank you for asking that. Don't get cynical. Don't get cynical and think that, you know, the top people with all the money manipulate everything. We, the people, rebel frequently. I see it all the time. Sometimes it's on the left, sometimes it's on the right, sometimes it's on the middle. We still run things if we have the will to run things. Thomas Jefferson would approve. Yes.
I was wondering about the Boeing, South Carolina issue. Is that a political retaliation against South Carolina? And I'm curious about what effect you think it'll have on politics in terms of the administration.
All right, it's obviously a complicated issue. It involves the National Labor Relations Board and Boeing, and it's a contest between Washington State, which is heavily Democratic and has a big union component, and South Carolina, which would vote for Michelle Bachmann. Okay, that's how Republican it is. Is there politics involved? You know, this, again, I don't want to shock you. You've just eaten, but yes. There's a lot of politics involved in that. There's always politics involved in just about everything. So, yes, politics is involved. It is, I don't think it's retaliation. It's a reward for people who have voted for a particular candidate with a little suggestion that they work even harder in the next election. And, you know, there we go. I think I better quit there. Anything else? Okay.
Larry, I just wanted to ask about the public pension issue with pressure on that so many places on budgets, changes in the labor laws in some places. Does that create a weather system that helps or hurts one party or the other in 2012?
Yeah, you know, it depends on who's in charge in a particular state and what they're doing to the public pensions. I mean, there's a case where regardless of party ID, you're going to be held responsible for any cuts you make in public pensions. And look, a lot of these states have got to change them. Again, because they don't have the money. You know, if the 50 states, I think it's Vermont that's the exception, has a constitutional requirement to balance the budget. And they have to do it. And in all 50 states, even those with local home rule, you still have the Dillon's rule applying, at least in part. Localities are a creature at will of the state government. So ultimately, they're also responsible indirectly for the localities' pension plans. They have to change. They have to change. But pain generally generates votes for the opposition. There are two things that I found that help the opposition party. One is cutting funding of any sort for voters. They retaliate at the polls. The other thing is insulting voters. It's very difficult to get the votes of people you insult. It is amazing how many politicians ignore that basic rule of life and politics. You cannot get the votes of people you insult. But look, that's another piece of the puzzle. In fact, the state picture and the locality picture is far grimmer than the federal picture. I don't want to get into it because I'm going to depress people. They're going to go off the road. Some may end their lives as they leave here, and I don't want that. We need more Wahoos, not fewer. I love this place, by the way. I've been here 41 years of my life. 41 years, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. It's just it's a wonderful place, and I'm so glad that you come back and visit it. I hope you'll do it more often. Yes.
Mr. Sabato, and a follow-up question on the Wisconsin. In Wisconsin and Ohio, the governors there encouraged the legislature to enact legislation to curb collective bargaining rights, which would affect union employees, state government, local government, police and fire, and teachers, a very big voting bloc. Do you think that that was a wise political move right off the bat of their terms in government, or do you think that might be a political suicide with voters remembering what's going to happen?
Well, that's a great question. Remember who they were and how they were elected. Scott Walker in Wisconsin, John Kasich in Ohio, won in good measure because they ran in 2010. The Tea Party had a major influence on generating turnout that was in the direction of cutting government spending. If they were going to do what they did, they had to do it right in the beginning. If you missed that window of opportunity during your honeymoon, and they've eliminated their honeymoons, they're both in the 30s or low 40s in public approval now, but they spent their political capital to please their constituents, the ones who by and large nominated them and elected them. You may disagree with what they did, but I see exactly why they did what they did. They pleased the people who elected them. They followed through on the platform they were elected to enact. Now, people have changed their minds in Ohio and Wisconsin. They no longer support some of the things they directly voted for in electing Scott Walker and John Kasich. But I really can't be that critical of Walker and Kasich for doing what they said they do during the election. If people are unhappy about it, then they need to ask themselves, why didn't I pay closer attention to what they were planning on doing? It's all about democracy. We're the ones who set the agenda, and we have to stop blaming everybody else. Anything else? Have we got any more? I just wish I had had some students like this who would stay after. I mean, if you ever carry class even 30 seconds over, you are killed with the looks many times. I mean, you should see these looks. This is my time. How dare you take this 30 seconds? And you just keep going. I'm so impressed.
Larry, Virginia's Attorney General, who, by the way, is a University of Virginia mechanical engineering graduate.
I was a teacher of Mr. Cuccinelli.
He
Don't
has
spread that too widely.
He has successfully sued the federal government regarding Obamacare. What is your perspective of the future of Obamacare?
All right. Well, let me first comment on King Cuccinelli. He came to visit me recently, a few months ago. We had a long talk. I remember it from my 101 class back, I don't know, it was 1990, somewhere in that vicinity. And Ken wasn't that political back then. He was in mechanical engineering. We had a good talk. We had what they call in diplomacy a frank exchange of views. And let me tell you why I'm upset with him. The very first thing he did in getting in office, Governor, was to sue his university. You can imagine how I feel about that. And being the kind of person I am, I let him have it with both barrels. And then he, frankly, let me have it with both barrels. And then we felt better about one another. And we went on to discuss other things. Look, I have no problems with this suit on Obamacare. That has to be decided by the Supreme Court. There's no question about that. You have to get a definitive ruling about this individual mandate. And you can argue it either way. I mean, there are good, strong arguments on either side of it. And like everyone else, I'm going to be fascinated to see what the Supreme Court, also known as also known as Anthony Kennedy, decides to do. You know, it'll be a 5-4 vote, and it depends on how Anthony Kennedy feels that morning, I guess. But we'll find out. I have no idea how they'll rule. I predict elections, not court rulings. But it's a perfectly legitimate lawsuit. Now, he's won at the federal district level, and we've had, I think it was 6 now. I think there's 6 cases, and judges have made their decision, and it's split almost evenly. And this will tell you how political it is. Every Democratic judge has voted to uphold the individual mandate, and every Republican judge has voted to strike it down. This is a fundamentally political matter, even though they're casing it in legal terms. And in the end, I think it's going to be a political decision whether the Supreme Court admits it or not. Maybe they'll try somehow and split the baby. I don't think they can do it in this case, but they might find a way to do it, and that will be up to Anthony Kennedy, probably. We got one more up here. Where are you with the mics? I have no idea. Okay, we got 2 right here.
What do you feel that talking about the courts, how the courts are making laws by saying you've got to do the following things, you've got to judge. It isn't just judging anymore, it is making rules. Going way back to Boston, where they bust the students, telling them how to bust the students. What's your opinion on that? How is it going to affect the elections?
Well, look, I'll make this general comment about courts. They have truly become a co-equal branch of government, and I don't think the founders ever intended that. There's no question they did not see the courts becoming as influential as they are today. For that reason, I've long favored fixed terms for federal judges and Supreme Court judges. I don't even believe the Constitution mandates these unlimited terms for life. That's not really what the Constitution says. It says they shall serve in good behavior. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean forever. I think you can make an argument that Congress could actually limit the terms without amending the Constitution. But I favor, and so do, by the way, large numbers of law professors on all sides of the political aisle, 15 to 18-year terms for Supreme Court judges and for federal appellate judges, federal district judges. That's long enough to be situated on Mount Olympus. That's really where the judges are. They're on Mount Olympus. And I think they get out of touch, and there's a certain feeling of power that comes with that kind of job that's relatively unlimited, particularly at the Supreme Court level. So I think limited terms would help the situation that you're describing. Let me get another question over here.
Just a really kind of simple one. Do you think
you're going to have to speak up? There's people
there
are leaving
go.
and I can't hear you.
All right. Do you think perhaps the Republican Party right now is having a certain amount of schizophrenia in that for 2 years they run that Obamacare is going to kill grandma, and then they turn around 6 months later and they want to destroy Medicare? It seems to me a real paradoxical kind of political argument, if you will.
Well, clearly you need to write a letter to certain members of Congress. That's a good political argument, and you know what? I bet that ends up in a TV ad in 2012. That would be my guess. So I'll leave that to you in communicating with partisans on Capitol Hill, but I certainly see your point. I think we have exhausted the patience even of these incredibly patient UVA graduates. I've really enjoyed being with you. Please drive safely, and thanks for joining us at Reunions.